Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Tran Vo. I am CEO and co-founder of MOBI. Thank you for having us here today. And Wayne, Rajat, and Griffin, please introduce yourself, please. Thanks.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Wayne Nightingale from Nissan Motor Acceptance, and I appreciate the invite from ITS America and from MOBI to speak on behalf of standardizations of vehicle titles and registration.
Hi, this is Rajat Rajbandari. I'm the head of standards and working groups at MOBI.
Hi, I'm Griffin Haskins. I'm the mobility finance lead at MOBI.
Thank you all. And so let me start my slides first. Can you see my slides okay? Yep, okay. So before I start, full disclaimer, I am not a technologist. I started out in chemistry, then on to art conservation. And I worked for many years in cultural heritage projects. Let me start my timer as well. So that the projects were for organizations such as UNESCO, the Getty based in Los Angeles. And back in 2018, along with Chris Ballinger, my co-founder, we launched MOBI, which is a smart city and smart mobility consortium. A very brief history about MOBI and why we are working on Web3 and cross-industry interoperability. Although we launched back in 2018, our history went back a few years before that. Back in 15, 16, and 17, many of the now MOBI members were very excited about blockchain and experimented with many proof of concepts. They all found that putting a vehicle, data, or service onto a chain, that was easy. The technology is there. However, the applications weren't able to scale. And looking back, there were three main reasons, I think. One is that the industry needs standards, standards to identify the vehicle, people, things, and trips. When does a trip begin? When does it end? And how do you connect the whole thing? And how do you share data and settle transaction? And the second reason is that companies were using Web3 technology, but they were still building centralized Web2 platforms and were not able to convince others to use them or to go onto them. For example, Daimler, Mercedes spent a lot of money building a mass multimodal platform, couldn't convince BMW or Volkswagen to go onto it. And BMW spent a lot of money building a supply chain platform, couldn't convince Ford or GM to go onto it. And when I spoke with DHL, they spent upwards to $50 million and couldn't convince FedEx or UPS to use it. There were many examples in auto industry, and I think this is going to be similar when you start talking about blockchain application. What we all found out is that centralized platforms for enterprise solutions don't scale. What we've learned in the last couple of decades is that we don't want to put our business onto somebody else's platform. And the third reason, I think, which is equally as important, is that while most anything can be put onto a blockchain, however, most things should not be put onto a blockchain. For example, sensitive business and customer data. Once it's there, it's no longer private, and blockchains can make for an inefficient database, and it can be costly and slow to use for transactions. So how blockchain is used is very critical. Every culture has chicken and rice dish. And when you search for it, there are hundreds, if not thousands of recipes. And how you cook it really matters. At MOBI, we use blockchain only for one thing, and that is for decentralized identifiers or DIDs registry. And I will talk a little bit more about DIDs in a few minutes. Along with our members, we are creating standards and building the community-owned and operated Web3 infrastructure for cross-industry interoperability. So why is cross-industry interoperability important? Most of the productivity that we gained in the last 50 years or so came from business automation enabled by digitization of internal processes. Very little of this was from the automation of extended external value chains with unrelated and untrusted parties. And even when those happens, it tends to happen for two or a small group of organizations still using centralized platform and not scalable to industry-wide, much less cross-industry. Across the connected ecosystem, we have hundreds and thousands of service providers and government agencies, all with unique databases, processes, and regulation that they have to comply by. Some of these organizations are billion-dollar companies, and some of them are just small mom-and-pops operations that provide services like smoke check or making the nuts and bolts for a vehicle. So to automate these extended value chains, we need to have a solution that is affordable, low barrier to entry for everyone. We need verifiable identity and claims that are recognized and standardized by all industries. At MOBI, we are currently working with other industry consortia as well, such as telecom, insurance, grid providers, and semiconductors. The big picture has been the same for us from the beginning. The convergence of the technologies that you see here will permit any connected entity, and that could be a person, a vehicle, a piece of infrastructure, to have a trusted identity and can directly communicate and securely transact with another connected entity. And in doing so, not have to go through a centralized platform. Once you have trusted identity that is linked with location into a verifiable trip, you will enable a pay-per-use economy that we've called the new economy of movement. I think for this crowd here, I don't really need to go into why trusted identity is important for digital commerce and for interoperability. Today, 60 to 65% of internet traffic is from bots, and 40% of total internet traffic is from malicious bots. So how can you do business with something or someone if you don't know who or what it is? And the arrival of generative AI is making this problem dramatically more important. Soon, it will be possible to fake almost anything and nearly impossible to detect fakes or uncover a fraud. So for cross-industry interoperability to happen, the solution needs to address these 5 things that you see on the screen here. First, that every entity must be identified and authenticated for every transaction. And then all the data, credentials, and claims must be verifiable as well. No one really wants to open up their database. Instead, most of our members want to be able to push the data to the edge for transaction to create data security and privacy, and also regulatory compliant as well. You want the data to go to intended recipient only. We all want the ability to selectively disclose and verify information at the moment of transaction and not having to store data before, during, or after each of the transaction. We want the solution to be affordable, interoperable, and extensible. So the solution has to be standards-based, platform-agnostic, and that works with any legacy system. So you don't have to build costly new infrastructure. Small businesses can be able to use it. And the last thing here is decentralization. And I'm not talking about the technology here. I'm talking about the fact that we want to build a community-owned and operated infrastructure, not a single owner of a platform. So to address all those requirements that we just walked through, we have been working on a solution which we call self-sovereign digital twins, or SSDTs for short. The concept of the digital twin has been around since the 60s. It was introduced by NASA. It is a digital representation of an object or system that captures near real-time data throughout its lifetime. And so SSDT are essentially digital twins that can self-generate verifiable credentials. They are universal translators so that we all can speak the same language. and they are encrypted locked data vaults, so that only accessible by the owner or the controller of the SSDT. They have the ability to authenticate identity and selectively disclose information when needed, and present information when is asked of them. So instead of, again, opening up databases, these SSDT can push out verifiable credentials and be verified. And I will walk through an example in a little bit. So it's important to note that the SSDT is using W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium standards. And the two standards we're using are decentralized identifier, DID standards, and verifiable credential, VC standards. These standards, since we use them, that means we can use the internet and an existing infrastructure for transaction without having to build any new infrastructure. And if you looked at the list of things that we need to address in the previous slide, the SSDT address all four, the first four of them. The last thing is, how do we make sure that no one entity owns the whole ecosystem? So to do that, we are building the Web3 infrastructure with our members. MOBI is technology agnostic. Therefore, we don't endorse any specific blockchain. 10 years from now, you don't know which blockchain is going to be around. I still have the floppy disk with my thesis on it that I can't open anymore. And the proof of concept in 2016 and 17 proved that blockchain works. That's not what's important. What's important is how we use blockchain. So the bottom layer here is all the blockchain protocols. We don't build that. We leave that to the experts. Instead, we building the layer 2, which we call the integrated trust network, or the ITN. And this is to create DIDs, decentralized identifier, for every entity that wants it, and deposit it onto blockchain. And think of it as a trust anchor, and then, or a phone book. That's a public channel. You can look up any phone numbers for any businesses that you want. Once you look it up and you want to communicate with them, you pick up the phone and you communicate in Zootopia, which is the layer 3, and it's a private communication channel, so it's not open to the public. So just a quick example of how a verifiable credential works in this ecosystem. For example, if you go into a bar and you need to prove that you're 21 years old before the bartender give you any alcohol. Right now, if you give them a driver license, it has not just your name and your age, but it has your exact birth date, your home address, and all that, that you may not want to be disclosing. So in this ecosystem, there's 3 actors at any time. There's the issuer of the credential, the holder of the credential, and the verifier of the credential. So the DMV would issue the driver license to me as a verifiable credential and signs it using their own DID. That's their signature. And then I will sign it using my own DID, and both are deposited into the integrated trust network. Then if I present it to the bartender can scan a QR code, for example, and ask, is this person 21 years of age? And then the answer come back could look something like this. It could have my picture, my name, and saying, yes, I'm 21 years old. And that's only the information you want to disclose at that moment. You don't need to disclose more than that. So this is a little bit of a busy illustration, but it's just to illustrate what we're trying to do with the ecosystem. So ignore a lot of it, don't need to read the details. The most important thing to remember here is that the pre-existing service layer, the web service layer, and the legacy system remain the same. We are not asking anybody to do anything different. Continue doing what you already know how to do. You do best. Already work out the business process and the logic already on there. What we implementing is the self-sovereign digital twins, that each entity can control it and can use it to send verifiable credential to each other, and use Zootopia and the ITN to verify these things. So all the communication and transactions in the ecosystem use verifiable credential. You don't have to past data, you can just say this person is 21 years old, yes or no, and that's it. That kind of example. And in a little bit, MOBI team is going to go into deep dive into a couple of critical use cases that we're working on, but they're just two examples of many of the use cases that our working groups are working on. As you can see, we have many working groups, not just standards creating, but also implementing the ecosystem that we have just talked about. So I'm going to stop sharing right now so that Wayne can do it.
Thank you, Tram. Let me get my screen share. Okay. Hi, I'm Wayne Nightingale, a 20-year industry veteran of auto finance based here in Dallas, Texas for Nissan Motor Acceptance Company, the captive auto finance company for Nissan and Affinity motor vehicles. I'm not a techie. I do not have a background in IT or infrastructure, but I manage the operations and call centers to assist our customers with loan and leases and see the need for standardization and modernization of our systems and our interfaces in multiple areas as we assist our customers and as we grow. You know, you look at it and go, from a benefit perspective, in looking at, as Tram discussed, there's multiple benefits adopting standards for all of us. Data privacy is always a concern. More ransomware, more data incidents. Blockchain technology has the capability to benefit all of us. Web3 is the next generation of the internet, and it is built on blockchain. That means this decentralizes secure. It's decentralized, secure, and transparent. It has a potential to revolutionize many industries, including the automotive industry. And I'll touch more about that, especially as I'm on the finance side of the automotive industry. Why wouldn't that be invested? You know, just like any other finance company, we spend time, money, and effort to be efficient, reduce costs, streamline processes, and work through the titling and registration of a vehicle that has a lot of areas for opportunity. Also, it has a lot of areas of opportunity for fraud, title washing, vehicle cloning, issues that we see on a more common basis as people get smarter. Technology continues to grow. You know, so when I look at it and go, what are some of the benefits that we want to? Data ownership, privacy. Users will own their data and be able to control it and have access to it. This is a major improvement over the Web 2 system, where large tech companies have the ability to collect and monetize the data that we currently deal with. If you had the access to, hey, I only need this part of my information, you don't have to go to or subscribe to other large corporations to get that type of information. That means it's reduced cost, it's improved efficiency across the board, and including eliminating intermediaries and streamlining the process, especially as we work and interface with multiple other companies and government institutions, including your data governments, your states, on perfecting titles and liens for our customers. This has a massive rollout that everyone looks at us and says, this is not the way to do it. Every state is different. You're absolutely right. But by creating a standard across the board, as Tram highlighted, you get the information you need. You have access to it. It's distributed on the edge. So only the piece of information that you need can go. So that means it is agnostic to the customer management system. Each of us have unique customer management systems. You don't have to upend all of those. You have that agnostic to API, that you're not doing custom APIs to manage this piece of it. Here's some issues that we have across the board as a finance company. These are things that we deal with every single day. We have roughly a 3% error rate on just trying to perfect a lien or a contract that we have. You know, common things that we see, and this is not just exclusive to NMAC. You know, I look at it, I have 4 individuals whose sole job in life is following up on correcting or getting accurate information regarding lien holders, regarding contracts, regarding VINs, you know, a missing lien holder name or misspelled. As Tran put it, she wanted to present her driver's license just to see if she's 21. I would love to have the ability to, using a digital twin, I know what information I need from a driver's license. I know your name, your address. I know your exact spelling of your name. With that, it makes it so much easier for us to perfect our lien to ensure that we have secured collateral or that a person has a correct title when they pay off their vehicle. Incorrect lien holder names. It is amazing how multiple franchises have issues getting the correct lien holder. You know, you walk in to buy a car, the dealership blasts that information out to 5 different lenders who all answer back within seconds to tell you, yes, we will loan this person money. It's amazing how many times we get it back and it's got another lien holder's name on it. Well, then we have to correct. Well, the other issue with that then is if you already tried to do it with that lien holder, then I have to get a letter from that lien holder saying, no, they have no interest in that vehicle because they didn't finance that. So when you look at it, the errors that are created on a daily basis because of manual input or simple mistakes when they're in the financing office of a dealership, this has the potential to absolutely correct and negate a lot of those errors across the board. Again, nothing is more frustrating for an individual. You pay off your vehicle, you want your title clean, and you want it quickly. A dealership, you look at it and go, you buy a car, a customer trades a car in. The most important thing to that dealership is how fast they can get the title to the vehicle they just purchased or the customer just traded in. So guess what? They can then sell that vehicle again. So it's one of those that it absolutely helps the industry as a whole by having this type of standardization across the board. Now, there are many examples of standardization in the past. You know, the railroad tracks in the 19th century created a national transportation system. The standardization of the shipping container in the 20th century reduced the cost of global trade. And then you go back to 1980 when they actually had the first formal IP address that was created, allowing us to communicate on the web. Perfecting a title takes weeks, months at times to do. Can we be more efficient and do it in days, hours? We reduce the cost, we improve the efficiency. Standardized titles and registration would make it easy to be more efficient to transfer ownership of vehicles, obtaining financing, registering vehicles in different jurisdictions. Again, you move from one state to another state. It is difficult. It is challenging. You have to go to the DMV. You have to fill out an application. It is ripe for mistakes and errors to be made at that time. This saves time and money for the consumer, for the business, and for government entities as well. Not to mention reduce fraud. You know, standardized titles and registration will make it more difficult to commit fraud, such as vehicle cloning, title washing, things that we in the auto industry deal with on a daily basis of, hey, your title got washed. Or worse, if you purchase a vehicle and the vehicle identification has been cloned and you're in possession of a stolen vehicle. There are things that across the board, this has the ability to make it cleaner, easier across the board. You know, standardized titles and registration would make it easier to track down stolen vehicles. As Tran mentioned, it's with blockchain technology, you add to, you don't take away. I know who the previous owner was. You can see that data or have access to that data on the fringe to make sure it's important to you and that you have a clean title to a vehicle and what you're actually purchasing across the board. So the benefits are absolutely numerous that are going across the board. And that's where, again, it's working together. You know, MOBI is agnostic. It is not in this. This is a nonprofit. They are not trying to create something that, hey, you benefit from financially. This is something that across the board that working with businesses, consumer, government entities to help reduce cost, improve efficiency, and improve public safety across the board. It makes it much cleaner and much easier. And we know working with government entities sometimes are the slowest to progress and update technology. This process being system agnostic, meaning the data needed by government entities is accessible on the fringe without custom API integration into the customer account management system that feeds back into our loan finance companies across the board, makes it much cleaner, much easier across the board. Again, you want to lower the cost, you want to improve efficiency, you want to reduce fraud, for the consumer because that doesn't benefit any of us across the board. And, you know, in summary, this is Web3 technology and standardization of automotive vehicle titles and registration. It really has the potential to revolutionize the automotive industry and how we do business today. Is this something that's coming tomorrow? Absolutely not. This is something you're thinking of, okay, 5 years from now, how is this going to create a new business model and efficient process for us to register vehicles, move them in and out of customers' hands? That's the second largest purchase a person typically makes in their life is their vehicle. And in doing so, you want to make sure it's efficient, secure, and innovative for everyone across the board and seamless. So I think we really have the potential to transform the automotive industry in using this standardization and technology that MOBI has developed. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rajat.
Thank you, Wayne. Let me share my screen. Okay, everybody can see my screen. All right, so this is, yeah, thank you. This is Rajat, and I'll be talking about the Global Battery Passport. This is probably the newest initiative at MOBI. We've been working on supply chain side of the battery for the last couple of years, and because of the impending regulations that are coming up, which I will mention in just a moment, including the European Union regulation and the US Treasury Section 30 guidance. And due to the fact that we have several of our members who are OEMs or EV manufacturers and suppliers and so on, there's a growing need for creating the interoperable, authentic, and privacy-preserving system to provide information about batteries, mostly for battery circularity. So the Global Battery Passport is a mechanism to provide that information for end consumers, regulators, and the owners of the batteries and EVs as well. So our initiative is with regards to use of Web3 technologies in order to deal with this, what I call a battery data trifecta, which is interoperability, authenticity, and privacy. Okay, so you probably have seen this kind of chart before, the rise of EV battery demand and EV demand globally. So I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but just wanted to show you the year-to-year change in lithium-ion battery demand over the last several years. A similar chart here, which shows the comparison between 2022 and 2023 and number of EV demand growing up in different parts of the world. Obviously, China is leading the way in terms of number of vehicle EVs that have been put in the market, and other regions are also kind of catching up. With so many EV vehicles in the market, there's always a question of what do we do with all these materials in the EVs, and especially critical minerals. If you pay attention to the right side, the rightmost diagram, what it shows is the amount of minerals and materials in a typical EV battery pack. And you'll see the lithium is 6 kilograms, going all the way up to graphite 50 kilograms. And lithium, cobalt, and nickel are considered critical minerals. And they're obviously they're expensive and hard to extract and so on. What the industry, the EV industry or the battery industry have done in the past several years is they have so they have made a lot of progress in extracting these minerals out from used batteries. To the extent it's very efficient now, although it is a question of financial sustainability and rate of return comparing to just getting the minerals from straight out of the ores. But the process of extracting these minerals have substantially improved over the last couple of years. So the idea is how do we prevent all these minerals from being dumped into waste site? How do we alleviate that environmental concerns, and at the same time recover and reuse minerals, as well as making sure that the EV batteries rather, their first use is on EVs, and then we can probably use them for other purposes once it reaches the end of first life. So typically EVs they come out when they come out of the factory, they have 100% capacity, and as it reaches about 80% capacity, those batteries cannot be used in EVs. But however, those batteries can be used for other purposes like grid storage and home storage. So there's a lot of push to use those EV batteries for second life use cases. There's also a growing interest among OEMs about creating what they call a closed loop mineral supply chain. Basically, it's a vertical supply chain where the battery producers and even car manufacturers are controlling all the material all the way from top to bottom. And the final reason for circularity is it's just, there's a lot of international trade and politics happening, as you may have heard about the US-China wars and trade wars and controlling the supply of lithium and so on. So it's the circularity of the EV batteries is seen as a hedge against all those uncertainties about where the materials are going to come from and where the minerals are going to come from. And there's also, obviously, all of that has manifested into a kind of a regulatory push in different regions of the world. So the first time a digital battery passport definition came out was in the European Commission in the battery passport regulation, battery regulation. The European Commission defines a battery passport as an electronic record of each battery placed on the market. It is a structured collection of product-related data with a predefined scope and agreed data ownership and access rights conveyed through a unique identifier. It also says the battery passport shall electronically register, process, and share product-related information amongst the supply chain, businesses, authorities, and consumers. And you may want to pay close attention to the phrase businesses, authorities, and consumers. What that means is that the battery passport then becomes a product which is going to provide a lot of information between the supply chain stakeholders. As you can imagine, there are many stakeholders involved in the battery supply chain and the value chain. And authorities are the ones that are kind of regulators who are looking at making sure the regulation that has been put out, whether it's a European Union or California Air Resource Board or US Treasury, whatever, they are compliant with providing that information to the battery. And finally, the consumers. So the battery supply chain is complex, so is the data. And this is just for an illustration purpose, but you probably appreciate the complexity of the material flow and the data flow. The dashed lines are data flow, and then the solid lines are material flow. This is obviously just for illustration purposes. And the idea is that a lot of the data about a battery, obviously is going to come from the EV manufacturers, but the EV manufacturers themselves get a lot of data from upstream supply chain partners like pack manufacturers, cell manufacturers. And as the EV batteries go through the second life of recycling, repurposing, there are lots of other stakeholders who get involved who also needs data about a battery. So the idea is that this passport becomes a gateway to provide information on the battery's entire life from birth to death, if you will, and as well as changes it has gone through over its life period, and then be able to provide that information to general public, regulators, and battery owners. Out of all the regulations that have come out so far, the EU regulation is the one that has passed. There's a new version of the EU regulation was published in July 12, 2023. We are also tracking other regulation that includes traceability of batteries, including California Air Resource Board, US Treasury, India, and Japan have also started to put out some draft regulations. The most nuanced one and most detailed one is obviously the EU regulation. So we're closely following the EU regulation, I've extracted two very important articles or paragraphs. Article 77, it says from 18 February 2027, each light means transport battery, each industrial battery with a capacity of greater than 2 kilowatt hour, including EV batteries, placed on the market or put into service shall have electronic record, which is battery passport. The paragraph 126 also mentions that the battery passport should be flexible, dynamic, market-driven, and evolves in line with business models. What it also mentioned is it should be based on a decentralized data systems set up and maintained by the economic operators. The definition of that is whichever entity is putting the battery into service or into the market. So we're looking at that phrase decentralized data systems, and we're trying to figure out what that exactly means. And we understand our interpretation is that it doesn't. The European regulation does not want one entity or one entity to kind of monopolize on the battery data. So this is the battery data trifecta. It's interoperability, privacy, and authenticity. They're obviously closely related. The interoperability means the battery data has to be standardized and harmonized regards to data attributes, definitions, and scope. Authenticity means the digital verification of data source, who's putting the data about a battery, whether it's an OEM or a second life user or it could be a pack manufacturer, and so on. And then the privacy obviously means data needed by specific users. So the regulators need certain types of data. The general public needs a very high level information about a battery, including things like weight and where was it manufactured. If an individual is the owner of the battery because he or she owns the vehicle, then the European regulation says that he or she is entitled to having sort of almost daily record of what is happening with the battery. So the privacy of the battery is also important, battery data. So why Web3? And we're talking about Web3 here. 4 reasons, especially with regards to the battery passport. Use a self-sovereign identity for batteries and stakeholders. And Trump mentioned that already. Use a federated infrastructure to verify battery identity and stakeholder identity. Use a federated registry to authenticate the digital signatures of stakeholders. So if a stakeholder says this is the battery that I produced, and here's the data related to it, the federated registry authenticates that yes, that particular identity actually put that data in the battery passport. So Web3 is very well suited to be able to do that. And obviously, one of the requirements of the EU regulation is to be able to push data to the edges. So battery producers are the ones who are responsible for providing data about the battery and also providing authenticity of the data. And lastly, so what is our plan moving forward? We recently launched a circular economy global battery passport working group with co-chairs Nissan, Honda, and Denso. And we're going to, as we move forward, we're going to map challenges and gaps for our members to issue passports. We're going to create data schemas and necessary standards for our members to be able to issue battery passports. We're also collaborating with various other institutions like Global Battery Alliance, Battery Pass Project, which is a German project, Catena X, which is a European initiative. And we want to make sure that we don't duplicate their efforts, because they're also building lots of standards. And finally, we're implementing an underlying Web3 infrastructure, which is identity and passport registry for our members to issue passports, issue digital passports. That's all I have. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to send me an email. And I'll pass it on to Griffin.
Thanks so much, Rajat. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see?
Yes.
Okay. Firstly, thank you everybody for being here today. I'll quickly introduce myself in just a little bit more detail. I'm Griffin. I'm the mobility finance lead. What that means is that I support the automotive finance working group in MOBI. I'm also a technical writer for MOBI. I'm not an engineer. I have an applied mathematics background, so I like to call myself engineering adjacent. In any case, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the automation of e-titling and e-registration pilot. Just going into a little bit more depth on the motivations for the pilot, some of those outcomes and so on. So why don't we just jump right in? So the motivation of the pilot really stems from the inefficiencies that exist throughout the current paper and electronic, depending on which state you're talking about, registration and titling systems. And those inefficiencies, they're varied. They have varying sources, varying solutions, but ultimately most of these arise due to a lack of interoperability and fundamentally a lack of trust between those pertinent stakeholders. Some examples of some of the core issues involved here are the need to verify claims, right? This Web3 infrastructure that we're building in these pilots, one of the things, and this is included later in the presentation, that we emphasize is that it doesn't require the altering of any of the internal processes. We're really focused on the external processes, the interactions that happen between stakeholders when they are exchanging data or exchanging claims, or more generally engaging in a multi-party business process. So at many points in the registration or titling process, a stakeholder will have to verify some sort of a claim or some sort of issued credential or certificate from another stakeholder. Without any sort of standard approach to issuing or validating those credentials, the result is that all of those verifications end up being very manual. Examples of certificates, claims, credentials, or et cetera that exist throughout this process are the manufacturer certificates of origin for each of the vehicles that are being sold, odometer disclosures at the time of the registration or titling, the consumer identity credentials whenever a vehicle purchaser is having to abide by red flag laws and the dealer is having to validate their identity, that driver's license, passport, or what have you, and that counts as a credential. And verifying those credentials, again, as I said, is typically now a very manual process, and so that sort of leads to the second core issue of a high level of manual processing. Without that standard approach, the current manual process for issuing these credentials or verifying them introduces errors that cause upstream difficulties. Wayne talked a little bit about that earlier with the example of, say, a name being misspelled, or more generally, data being erroneously or mistakenly entered, written down for whatever reason. Given that that is done manually, that is really the source. If they were able to pull that data directly from a credential issued by, in the case of the name misspelling the consumer, that wouldn't be possible. Finally, in a more general sense, this pilot is motivated by the desire to optimize data privacy to the maximum degree possible. By packaging zero knowledge proofs in these credentials, and where pertinent, where it's sensical to take this approach given the process involved, replacing the direct information exchange with a proof pertaining to that data, essentially allows the risk surface to be minimized as much as you can. The pilot's objectives and outcomes, again, the note above here, we want to show part of what we want to demonstrate with this pilot is that these stakeholders are able to retain pertinent existing internal processes, and that the system, what's being built, is really only impacting the inter-stakeholder interactions, right? The objective of the pilot is to demonstrate interoperability and privacy preservation between legacy systems within the registration and titling process through all stakeholders' use of DIDs, VCs, and zero knowledge proofs, leveraging the ITN and Zootopia. as the key outcome, what we're expecting to see is a streamlining and simplification of the operational processes, a reduction in the errors, and therefore the and by proxy a corresponding measurable reduction in the operational latency. So here, this is going to be measured as the turnaround time for a title or registration issuance, a title transfer, or lien release. These sorts of processes, defining the latency from beginning of the process to the close in the current system, and then seeing exactly how much we reduce that. So that's the key outcome here, at least for this phase one. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stakeholders and some of their benefits, just so that everybody can get a really clear idea of who is involved in this pilot. The first main stakeholder, we have the vehicle manufacturers themselves. They are the entities that are instantiating these vehicles into the system, that are issuing these manufacturer certificates of origin, that instantiate their title into the system. And benefits for them, they have the potential to be able to leverage and potentially monetize their telematics data on the vehicle's condition, mileage, or other sorts of vehicle data that are useful in that process. For example, being able to monetize accident histories or maintenance records in order to accurately flag a title if a vehicle has been in some sort of a flood and you have a flood title, or a major accident, you have a salvage title. That as one example. The OEMs are also able to preserve their consumer data privacy and have superior control over any of their sensitive business data. Again, by being able to leverage zero knowledge proofs, they are minimizing minimizing as much as possible any sort of exposure of that data. Then you have the financial institutions. These are the lenders, and then bundled within that category are their corresponding servicers and service providers. The main benefits, again, are that increased operational efficiency and therefore the reduced latency in that process around the lien issuance, the lien release, and then that title and registration management and issuance. They're able to better preserve their own consumer data privacy. They're able to achieve interoperability with insurance and other stakeholders around total losses, which again, sort of back to that first point, reducing that turnaround time for the lien release and the title transfer. They're able to improve lien perfection rates, improve discoverability, et cetera. Third main stakeholder are the dealerships that have the reduced turnaround time for the title issuance and lien release, therefore allowing them to more rapidly get vehicles out onto the lot, sell them, and carry on their business. Similarly, they also enjoy the consumer data privacy guarantees. They enjoy a slightly reduced risk, and they're able to, it says verify insurance there, but more generally, able to verify claims that would otherwise require a manual verification. Insurance is one example, and odometer disclosure is another example. The consumer's identity is a third. Moving on to the next stakeholders, we have third-party data consolidators. These are, again, third parties that that store, consolidate, and then are able to push and pull data pertaining to the history of ownership or the condition of a given vehicle. And they would be able to, with the system, ensure verifiably that a title has not been washed, title washing being a major problem, as we discussed earlier. We have the consumer, so they're able to protect their own data privacy. They also similarly enjoy this reduced turnaround time, the elimination of any sort of need for that consumer to go back and refill out forms, any sort of the elimination of any consumer actions pertaining to a mistake in the process upstream. And then finally, we have the fleet operator, which the working group has since decided not to include in the phase one scope. However, they would get similar benefits to the consumer, as in this program, in this process flow, the fleet operator and the consumer are the ones purchasing the vehicle, and so they occupy a similar role, and they similarly benefit from that reduced turnaround time, from that data privacy preservation. However, they would get additional benefits in terms of superior data management, et cetera. Lastly, we have the motor vehicle authorities. They get to enjoy, again, faster turnaround time and an operational efficiency for the title processing, interoperability and connectivity between jurisdictions, able to verify information about titles with different states, utilizing zero knowledge proofs to prevent any sort of concern around data leakage. And more generally, just better discoverability and visibility into data like VINs, which oftentimes are not well recorded, and up to a third are actually wrong at the time of reporting. I'll quickly go over. We're getting to the top of the hour. We want to make sure we leave time for some questions. I'll quickly go over the current and next steps. The working group has finalized the pilot workflow, and what that means is each individual step in the process, and has begun work on developing all the pertinent data schemas, as well as defining the user journeys, user stories. And once that's complete, we'll proceed to screen designs and development sprints. Once the first phase is completed and demonstrated, the finance working group will move forward to determine whether to proceed with a phase 2, which would expand that phase scope to encompass more stakeholders and scenarios. Again, the scope of this phase 1 pilot is a happy path, as we call it, for a consumer buying a new vehicle with financing. A phase 2 could expand this to include fleet operators, to have the path be less happy, to accommodate errors, increasing the scale as well. So that what a phase 2 exactly would look like would be determined by the working group at that point. I want to talk about sort of the ultimate goal here. It really is to demonstrate the utility of the Web3 infrastructure that we've talked about, demonstrate that its utility within the electronic registration and titling use case. MOBI is a nonprofit. What that means is that MOBI is not ever going to be bringing a product to market, and certain, not an electronic titling, a registration management system, nor any other. We want our members to develop those solutions and bring them to market. So the ultimate goal of this pilot is to demonstrate that this infrastructure works for this use case, that it does provide this sort of a unique value, and that they would be able to much more easily and cheaply deploy this sort of an application onto that infrastructure and more rapidly reduce that time to market. In addition, they can build on that code as they develop their own solutions, the code that was developed in the pilot. So that's sort of the ultimate goal of this pilot. For any of you guys who are scratching your heads about why a nonprofit was doing a sort of pilot like this.
Hey, Griffin, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we wrap it up just in case?
Yes, I'm done. Thank you very much. So we'll go ahead and take questions now.
Thank you. Victoria, how do you want the question to be answered? People type in, or should they speak up?
Yeah, so if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A pod, which is located in the taskbar of your screen, and then we'll be able to see that and help answer your questions. Thank you.
So there were about 5 questions that I answered already from knowing the ITN. Just quickly, the ITN is not blockchain. It uses blockchain to anchor DID. And right now, the 2 blockchains that we use are Fabric and Ethereum. There will be more added in the future. Again, we don't want to be locked into any one specific blockchain. And then the other question is, how is Zootopia different from Hyperledger Ares? We don't use blockchain for Zootopia at all. It's not built on that. We want it to be very easy for our members, so our members don't even have to develop blockchain to use Web3 infrastructure. The other question is, can you use DidWeb using the ITN? Technically, yes, because we have implemented the universal resolver, which answers the next question. How do DIDs get resolved or generated by the ITN? And we use universal resolver. We didn't use our own DID resolver because we want it to be used by across industry as well. And then the latency impact, we did a couple tests. One is with the EU Commission. I put down the link for that pilot, and you can look up the report written by them. We also wrote a mass multimodal report, which we'll be posting soon, but you can read about that pilot. We were testing up to 1 million user. So it was generated in 9 seconds, I think. So we'll post that report soon as well. There's no open source repository. We do use open source repository. However, we want this to be a federated network because we want our members to be able to run nodes and be able to own a piece of the infrastructure. So Zootopia and ITN are not owned solely by MOBI. We own a fraction of the share, and then our members who run nodes will own shares. And then anybody invest in that infrastructure will also own share. The reason why we don't have open source repository at this moment is because it took us a long time to get to where we are. We've done a lot of research with our members, and we want continued membership to be able to do what we do. Consortia, as you know, we're a consortium and we are startups, so it's a double whammy, no money and no money. So we need membership dues. The first 2 questions, Griffin, can you answer that? The NIST question?
Yeah, I've been taking a look at that question. As for the second question about the simple authentication protocols like OAuth 2, I don't think that was a question, more of a comment. So if there is a question, please feel free to clarify it. As for your first question, is FHWA-TRB or NOCOE going to have they defined standards, or will they define standards to use? And then such as, then you gave some examples of NIST standards. So my understanding is that those organizations do put out some standards, but pertaining to a range of different topics within the specific context of registration or titling. I don't think so. And we certainly wouldn't be able to speak to their future plans because we are not affiliated. You know, we're a private industry consortia, not associated with FHWA, TRB, or NOCOE.
Thank you. Another question: Open ID standards for verifiable credentials compatible with MOBI? If we both are using W3C standards, they should be compatible. The only thing we need to think about is interoperability when it comes to identity. That's the first step, right? That's just like, okay, you have a trusted identity, and then now what? Tram, she has a trusted identity. Is she trustworthy in business? Has she have any violation? Has she done any of that? That is going to be additional things that needs to happen for interoperability. And let's say if I'm a supplier to Nissan, and then I'm a supplier to Honda, and I'm a supplier to Stellantis, how do I make sure that in the ecosystem, I only have to onboard myself once, and then Nissan, Honda, and Stellantis all accept my credentials? Right now, as you all know, that is not possible. And even within states, if you are Ford, you have an identity in California. When you go to Arizona, you have a different identity. And then within Arizona, you might have multiple jurisdictions who has different identity for Ford. So it's almost impossible to identify one entity across the states right now. And we are trying to hopefully ease that pain and make that more interoperable in the next few years, as Wayne was mentioning. Okay. Any other questions that we didn't answer?
I see one that says, how does ITN related to ION? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with ION. If you could expand that acronym.
Right, there's Identity Foundation, ION.
I don't think right now that that there is a direct relationship between the ITN and ION.
Okay.
I am.
So
go ahead.
We are not focusing on blockchain for identity. We are just using blockchain to anchor DIDs, which is decentralized identifiers. They technically is one part of identity, right? You have identity composed of identifiers and the relevant data that goes with that identifiers. So we only use it for one thing only.
I see that we're getting over time here. I also just wanted to say, like Rajat said, if you do have any other questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, or if you think of some later, please feel free to email us. If you have any questions for me specifically, my email is griffin@dlt.mobi. That's GRIFFIN @dlt.mobi.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.